Welcome, dear listener. Let the day melt behind your eyes. You're safe now, warm, still, and ready to drift. Tonight we travel far from softness into the dry winds of the ancient Peloponnese. But don't worry, you won't feel the cold of the Spartan mountains, only the quiet chill of their story. Can you imagine being evaluated before you've even opened your eyes? In Sparta, that was not imagination, it was law. A Spartan child was not a child, not in the way you might know, not a bundle of joy, but a potential asset or a liability, nothing in between. The city did not have the luxury of sentiment. Its walls were discipline, its air was expectation. A baby, only hours old, would be placed into the hands of elder citizens, stern, stone-faced men who had once themselves passed this very same trial. They would hold the infant not with affection, but with calculation. They looked for symmetry, strength, solidity. They observed the joints, the limbs, the color of the skin. They listened to the breath. Was it too shallow? Did the baby cry too weakly? Was the head misshapen? There was no margin for what they considered weakness. If a baby was judged to be unfit, and this could mean anything from a physical deformation to simply being too small, the decision was swift, silent, and irreversible. The infant was taken to a place called Apotate, the deposits, at the foot of Mount Taygetus, a ledge, bare and cruel, where the wind howled louder than any cradle song. There, the baby was left. No ceremonies, no weeping. The act was not considered tragic. It was framed as practical, even moral, to spare the city a future burden, to honor the strength of the whole over the life of one. Most babies survived, of course. Most were deemed acceptable. But survival was never the same as security. A Spartan household offered little warmth, figuratively or literally. Infants were bathed in wine instead of water, as a test of hardiness. It was said that weaker children would convulse or cry endlessly from the sting. This wasn't punishment, it was preparation.
Swaddling cloths were coarse, like sack linen. The air inside the home was dry, pungent with smoke and oiled leather. You might hear the murmur of your mother, but you wouldn't be coddled. If you cried too much, no one rushed to soothe you. If you didn't eat, the food simply wasn't replaced. To raise a Spartan was to ignore the instincts of tenderness. But mothers, they were not unloving, only disciplined. Their lullabies, when they did whisper them, were quiet songs about honor and battle. Their gaze, sharp as a spear. They loved through preparation. Their affection took the form of readiness. A Spartan mother did not dream of her son becoming a poet or a merchant. She dreamed of him becoming a wall, a shield, a name on a memorial stone that read only, "He died well." Even the very architecture of Sparta reflected this ideal. There were no grand temples like in Athens, no ivory statues, no painted pottery, just functionality, utility, stone that never boasted, austerity that became identity. And what about the fathers? By law, Spartan men lived in barracks, not at home. They saw their sons only in glimpses, and never to comfort. To be a father in Sparta was to watch from a distance, to hope your child never needed your protection, because if he did, it meant he had already failed. So, what kind of society chooses steel over silk? What future does a culture build when it begins with subtraction, with removing the unworthy? Perhaps tonight, as your mind softens and your breath grows steady, you'll wonder, what would they have thought of you? But don't worry. Here, in this quiet space between sleep and thought, there is no judgment, only curiosity, only gentle echoes of a time long past.
The sun has barely warmed the olive groves when it happens. You're 7 years old, just tall enough to see over the edge of the clay hearth. You've learned to keep your hands still, your voice low. You've eaten what little you're given, rarely asking for more. And now, the knock at the door. No one cries, not even your mother. She knew this day would come. Every mother in Sparta knows. A quiet nod, a bundle of rough wool thrown over your shoulders, sandals strapped, your hair cut blunt. Childhood, what there was of it, ends with a doorway closing behind you. Welcome to the Agoge. It was not a school in the way you might imagine. There were no desks, no ink, no stories about curious frogs or kind giants. There were no parents dropping you off with worried smiles, no warm bread waiting at home. The Agoge was a system, a forge, its purpose to burn away softness and leave only endurance. You were not alone. 100 boys, all like you, all taken from their families, all equally uncertain. You slept in barracks, not beds, thin mats on stone floors, the scent of old straw, smoke, and the ever-present human musk of bodies in tension. Mornings began before the sun dared stretch its arms. You rose without complaint. That was already expected of you. Any hesitation was noted by the older boys and punished, not by the instructors, but by your peers. Discipline was horizontal. Brotherhood came with bruises. You were given one garment, a single cloak, coarse and faded. No undergarments, no change for the seasons. If it rained, you were wet. If it froze, you were cold. You learned not to shiver. You learned not to ask. Food was minimal. A bowl of black broth, a sour iron-rich stew made from pig's blood and vinegar, was a staple. Hard bread, sometimes old cheese. Hunger was not a mistake in the system, it was the system. The idea was simple. A hungry boy becomes clever. He learns to steal, but he also learns not to get caught. And if you were caught, the punishment wasn't for the theft, it was for the failure. Shame wasn't in taking, it was in failing to take well. Lessons included music, but not for pleasure. You learned war songs, sharp, rhythmic chants to carry you through marches and shield drills. Reading was limited, just enough to understand orders, to write your name, perhaps. Philosophy was for Athenians. Spartans did not ask why, they asked when. Fighting was daily, not sport, not play, a way to test hierarchy. You were taught to attack, defend, fall, rise, repeat. The pain was real, but never indulged. If you cried, you were noticed. If you winced, you were marked. The instructors, by Donomoi, were distant but ever present. They watched with a hawk's patience, intervening rarely, encouraging almost never. Their silence was its own form of instruction. You learned through friction, with others, with yourself, with the limits of your body and mind. But in this starkness, something unexpected bloomed. Brotherhood. The other boys were not just rivals, they were limbs of the same body. You shared food when one had none. You rubbed warmth into cold fingers during icy nights. You stitched tears in each other's cloaks with needles made of bone. Bonds formed through shared scarcity often last longer than those born of luxury. And somewhere in the rhythm of this harsh life, you began to believe in it, in the purpose, in the pride, in the strange comfort of not having to choose your path, only to walk it well. Because the agoge wasn't about making you learn. It was about making you unforget what it meant to belong, to Sparta, to your cohort, to the shield beside yours. And when you drift off tonight, warm under blankets that no Spartan child ever knew, perhaps part of you will wonder what it would be like to live a life where you're never alone, but never free. The days blur together. Cold stone mornings, barked orders, endless drills. But the hunger, that never fades. It lives in your belly like a quiet, growling echo. Not enough to collapse you, just enough to sharpen you. You're not starving. That would be inefficient. But you're never full, never comfortable. The food is portioned with care, not for nourishment, but for necessity. A ladle of black broth, thick and metallic. A piece of barley bread, so dry it scrapes the roof of your mouth. Occasionally a strip of goat meat, salty and thin. They say the Spartans didn't believe in indulgence, but this wasn't about belief. It was about strategy. They made you hungry on purpose. You see, hunger teaches things no tutor ever could. It sharpens the senses, makes you study the shadows, makes you listen for the sound of footsteps, not because you're afraid of being hunted, but because you're doing the hunting. Not animals, not enemies. Bread, cheese, dried figs if you're lucky. They teach you to steal, not openly, not in class, but everyone knows, it's expected. It's part of your growth. You must feed yourself, just not in the obvious way. One boy might sneak into the storeroom. Another distracts the cook. A third keeps watch. The bread is snatched. It's not a feast, just enough to silence the growling for one night, just enough to feel clever. But then, someone makes a mistake. A dropped crust, a noise, a misplaced glance. The instructors find out, and punishment comes swiftly. Not for the act, but for the failure. Being caught means you're sloppy, unready. And if you're unready in a barracks, you're a risk. If you're a risk on the battlefield, you're a threat to everyone.
So you're beaten. Not savagely, but enough to sting, enough to remember. The lesson is not pain, it's shame. A quiet, burning shame that makes you plan better next time, because there will be a next time. Hunger returns every evening like a loyal dog. Some boys become legends for their cunning. They hide food in hollowed-out sandals. They mimic the voices of guards. One boy, it said, trained a stray dog to bring him scraps from the kitchens. Another disguised himself as a servant for days, sneaking into the storerooms at night, only to be unmasked by the smell of stew on his breath. These stories are whispered like bedtime tales, not with laughter, but with admiration. In Sparta, cleverness was a kind of courage. But not all stories end in glory. One boy, quiet, thin, always watching, once stole a fox cub to roast in secret. When he was approached by a guard, he panicked, hid the animal under his cloak. The cub, terrified, clawed and bit him. Still, he remained silent, did not flinch, did not cry. When the others found him, he was slumped against the wall, dead, but not disgraced. The instructors spoke of him for days. A boy who chose death over exposure, not to protect the fox, but to protect his dignity. Even that, they said, was a form of victory. And so you learn, not just to fight,
but to survive with grace, to hunger with purpose, to steal with honor. Strange words in other places, perhaps, but not here. In Sparta, where survival is not shameful, but sacred. And as the night folds around you like a blanket, one warmer than any Spartan ever knew, you may find your dreams filled with the scent of burnt bread, the thrill of stolen cheese, the warmth of silent pride. Close your eyes. Rest. Tomorrow, you might need to steal again.
It starts with silence. Not the silence of solitude, but of unity. A shared, almost sacred hush that settles over the barracks when the drills are done, the meals are finished, and the cloaks are draped over tired shoulders. No songs, no chatter, just the soft creak of wooden beams and the slow breathing of boys who were not boys anymore. You are one of them, one among many. The agoge has done its work. Where once you walked alone, now you move as part of a unit, not just physically, but emotionally, instinctively. You've learned to anticipate, to adapt, to match the steps of those beside you without looking. Like limbs of a single creature, many hearts, one will. This was not achieved by comfort. It was forged in friction. You remember the fights, not battles, but tests. Every boy had something to prove. Pride, strength, quickness, cleverness. At first, the bruises lingered longer than the friendships. A shove in the training yard, a slap over stolen bread, the sting of being last to strike in a drill. These were not accidents. They were rituals, scars that mapped your place in the pack. And over time, that pack became your home. The boy who once bloodied your lip now shares his cloak when the frost creeps in. The one who mocked your stumble now steadies your foot in formation. You no longer compete against each other, you complete each other. Because in Sparta, isolation was failure. Strength wasn't in the individual, it was in the whole. The phalanx, the tight wall of shields, only held if every man moved with perfect trust. One crack, one weakness, and all were lost. So the agoge taught you more than how to wield a spear. It taught you how to belong. You trained side by side, ate side by side, slept side by side. You shared pain, but also quiet victories. A well-timed throw, a rare joke passed under breath, a wink of approval from an older boy. These moments, as small as they were, warmed more than any fire.
And the older boys, the Irenes, they watched you. At first with suspicion, later with pride. If they struck you, it was with purpose. If they praised you, it was rare, but rich. Their approval became a kind of currency. Sometimes, late at night, one would tell a story, not loud, just above a whisper. Tales of battles past, of brothers who had stood in the same dust, who had once crouched on the same stone floors, and who now guarded the city's borders as men. You listened with your whole body, because you knew that soon it would be you. The barracks, despite their harshness, began to feel sacred. The smells, smoke, leather, sweat, became familiar. The scratches on the wooden walls were carved initials, little declarations of, "I was here." Boys long gone. Boys just like you. One night, a boy wakes crying. It's rare, but it happens. No one mocks him. No one tells him to stop. Instead, someone shifts their mat closer. A shoulder brushes his. A hand rests near his own. Nothing more. No words. No shame. Just presence. This, too, is Sparta. Because behind the discipline, Beneath the hardness, there was a bond, quiet, strong, unbreakable. You weren't taught to love, not explicitly, but you were taught to trust. And sometimes, in silence, that's the same thing. So as you drift tonight into the rhythm of your own breath, think of that barracks, dim and smoky. Think of a dozen boys lying shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in thin cloaks, but thick with loyalty. And know that even in the harshest systems, the human spirit finds ways to connect, to protect, to care.
You've grown taller, leaner. Your legs are stronger, your steps more silent. You no longer flinch at cold water, nor wince when your bare feet meet frozen earth. And yet, something deeper has changed. Not just the body, but how you wear it. Pain no longer surprises you. In Sparta, pain is not a punishment. It is a pedagogue, a teacher more consistent than any human voice. And here, in the Agoge, it speaks often. The day begins, as always, with drills, but now they last longer. The weight of the shield bites harder into your arm. Your spear splinters not just against straw targets, but sometimes bone and bruised muscle in sparring matches that blur the line between training and trial. You're expected to keep moving, to keep fighting, even when your chest burns and your limbs tremble, especially then. If your hand shakes, steady it. If your knees buckle, lock them. If blood rises in your mouth, swallow it and march on. You were told once, quietly, by an Irene, that Sparta does not raise soldiers, it raises silence. The body, they say, is merely a servant of the will, and the will must never break. And so, the tests escalate. There is the whipping ritual, the diamastigosis, held not in secret but in public, in the sanctuary of Artemis or Thea. You've heard the stories, how boys stand before the altar and receive lashes not for wrongdoing, but for virtue, to prove how much they can endure without a sound. But no, don't picture blood. That's not the point. The ritual is not about harm. It's about honor, endurance, the art of standing still while pain whispers in your ear, begging you to surrender. You learn to listen without answering.
This, too, is education. You might think the instructors cruel, but they rarely raise their voices. There is no chaos in their commands. They are calm, precise, even gentle in their own way, because they know the goal is not to punish, it is to prepare. Every scraped knee, every pulled muscle, every torn palm is a rehearsal. For what? You're not told, but you begin to sense it. A life ahead not of comfort, but of consequence. You notice it in your posture, in the way you no longer look to the sky when it rains, you just keep moving, in how your hands no longer fumble with straps or buckles, they work without needing thought, in how your breath finds rhythm in exhaustion. And sometimes, in moments you never expected, you feel something strange. Pride. Not the kind you shout about. A quiet, steady flame inside. You stood longer today, You blocked a blow without blinking. You woke before the call. No one cheered. No one needed to. That's not the Spartan way. And as night settles over the stone walls once more, you lie back, sore, bruised, tired in every fiber, and yet calm. You've passed through another day of tests not marked on parchment, but written across your muscles. You begin to understand what they mean when they say, pain builds discipline. Because it isn't about becoming numb. It's about choosing what you do with the sensation. You don't run from it. You absorb it. And in that choice, you grow. So rest now. Let your own breath be your lullaby. Your body may ache, but your spirit is still, strong, steady, Spartan.
While the boys trained and marched, ran and endured, others watched, always watching, not from the shadows, but from the edges of the fields, the doorways of homes, the shaded corners of the agora. Spartan women, mothers, wives, sisters, daughters, rarely spoke of pride, but you could see it in the way they stood, upright, unwavering, eyes sharp as any blade. In other parts of Greece, women were cloistered behind walls, quiet in private chambers, rarely seen, never heard. But Sparta was different. Here, women moved freely. They owned land. They ran estates while the men were at war. They spoke in the public square. They trained their bodies too, not to fight, but to be strong enough to bear strong children. A Spartan mother was not a comforter. She was a sculptor. She shaped her son not with lullabies, but with questions. If you come back from war, will it be with your shield or on it? It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. A warrior returned victorious, bearing his heavy round shield, or not at all. To lose it in retreat was dishonor. To die with it was purpose. This was the air you breathed growing up. Not softness, not sentiment, but clarity. Your mother did not cry when you left for the Agagi. Her hands did not shake. She might have kissed your forehead, but her eyes told you everything. Be brave. Be silent. Be worthy. And though you rarely saw her again during training, you felt her presence. When your stomach twisted with hunger, you remembered her voice, teaching you how to endure. When your legs burned after hours of marching, you saw her posture, never slouched, never slow. When you were struck during a lesson and refused to cry, it was her discipline, not your own, that held you still. Spartan women were not soldiers, but they were not soft. They ran races, threw javelins, wrestled. They kept their bodies strong not for vanity, but for legacy. They were told from girlhood that their role was sacred, to raise warriors, to protect the state by shaping its future. And so they did. There were stories. One tells of a mother who received news of her 5 sons' deaths in battle. She asked simply, "What of Sparta?" When told the city was safe, she nodded and walked away. Not broken, not empty, but fulfilled. That is how they were taught to grieve, with pride over tears. Wives, too, understood this burden. A Spartan woman might see her husband once a month, even less. Marriage in Sparta was not about romance. It was arrangement, continuation, duty. Husbands slept in the barracks well into their 40s. Even weddings were peculiar. The bride's head was shaved. She wore a man's cloak and sandals. The symbolism was clear. Unity through sameness. Love was not found in flowers, but in resilience. And daughters, they learned early. They were not confined. They were educated. They debated. They ran. They trained. They sang choruses in festivals, honoring gods and heroes alike. They were not hidden. They were heard. It's said that Spartan women had more freedom than any other in Greece. And with that freedom came expectation, to be sharp in word, firm in spine, and most of all, to never weaken the resolve of a Spartan man. So as you lie quietly tonight, warm and comfortable, picture them, those quiet pillars of Sparta, women who did not need swords to shape empires, who molded warriors not through battle, but through belief. And ask yourself, how many civilizations were held not by walls, but by mothers?
The walls of Sparta were not made of stone. That's what they used to say. Sparta needs no walls, said King Lycurgus, because her men are her defense. And for a long time it was true. But every fortress, even one made of flesh and discipline, has something just beyond its edge. And so, at some point, you began to notice what lay outside. Not in detail, not yet, but in whispers, in stories. Of Athens, mostly. The city of olive trees and laughter, where boys sat on marble steps and debated the stars, where women wore robes of linen and perfume, and poets recited verses not in war chants, but in love songs. A place where food was seasoned not just with salt, but with imagination. Where philosophers taught that questions were more powerful than orders. It sounded impossible. You could not imagine asking a question in Sparta. Not a real one. You were taught answers, given instructions. Life here was not about curiosity. It was about clarity, precision, function. And yet, the stories lingered. You'd meet traders at the market, allowed in under strict watch, their tunics brighter than yours, their voices louder. Their hands gestured in circles when they spoke, as if words could be painted in the air. One man once offered you a fig. You hesitated, took it. It was soft, sweet. It dissolved on your tongue like sunlight. Unlike the hard barley bread you were used to, this fruit didn't demand your teeth. It asked only for your attention. For a moment, it didn't feel like food. It felt like choice. But just for a moment. You handed the pit back and said nothing. Later that night, as you lay on the cold stone floor beside your brothers, that sweetness still haunted your mouth. Was it weakness or wonder? No one answered, because no one asked. Sparta didn't hate the outside world. It simply didn't trust it. They called Athens decadent, soft, a place where men cared more for words than action, where theater replaced honor, where laws could be debated instead of obeyed. To a Spartan, that was dangerous. And yet, slowly, you began to see the edges. During your marches, you passed other villages, smaller, poorer, but freer in strange ways. Children played in the fields. Women laughed openly. Men reclined under trees during the day. You saw the difference, and you understood why Sparta feared it. Because freedom, real freedom, is contagious, and Sparta ran on control. Still, part of you wondered, what did they read, those Athenian boys? What was it like to draw with ink instead of blood? To choose your career, not be born into it? To marry for love? To dine for taste?
It was not that you wished to leave. No, you were Spartan. That meant something. It meant everything. But like a crack in a polished shield, the thought was there. A question, small and persistent, could both ways be right? You kept it to yourself, because questions like that didn't belong in the barracks. Instead, you repeated the words you'd learned since childhood. Better to be feared than loved. Better to be silent than wrong. Better to die than disobey. They were safe words, strong, and they were true, at least here. But still, the fig, the smile, the stories, you buried them beneath discipline, beneath honor. And yet, as you drift tonight into sleep, safe in your own chosen bed, free to wonder without consequence, perhaps you too will ask, what lies beyond the walls we choose not to build?
There comes a moment when the training ends, or rather, shifts. Because in Sparta, one never truly stops being trained. But there is a threshold, a quiet, heavy step from boyhood into the long shadow of manhood. And when that day arrives, you feel it not in words, but in weight. The weight of bronze. You are now old enough, not yet 20 but close, to become a hoplite, a full citizen soldier of Sparta. The title doesn't come with ceremony. There is no applause, no feast, but the transformation is real. It begins with the armor, not issued, not gifted, earned. Piece by piece, the tools of your new life are assembled. You are brought to the armory. The light is dim, filtered through narrow slats. The air smells of oil, leather, and old iron. Around you, quiet men, older, watch without expression. First, the greaves, curved bronze shin guards molded to fit your legs. You slide them on, the metal cool against your skin. Then, the cuirass, chest armor, heavy, rigid. It sits like a burden, but also a promise. Next, the helmet, Corinthian style, full-faced, narrow-eyed. Once you put it on, the world shrinks. Sound is muffled, vision is tunneled. You can only see forward, like a Spartan must. And then, the shield. Aspis, large, round, wood and bronze, nearly a meter across. You place your arm through its loop. It doesn't just rest on you, it claims you. The shield is not for you, they remind you. It is for the man to your left. Lose your sword? Acceptable. Lose your helmet? Forgivable. Lose your shield? Unthinkable. Because in the phalanx, the close-packed Spartan formation, each warrior is responsible not only for himself, but for the man beside him. Protection is communal. Cowardice, contagious. And so the shield becomes more than equipment. It is a symbol of duty, of belonging.
You are also given a red cloak, faded from years of tradition, a color said to hide blood, though you suspect it's more about presence than secrecy. Red was the mark of the warrior, even when there was no war. Your spear, Doru, is long, slender, with a deadly iron point and a counterweight butt spike. Not thrown, thrusted. Not wild, precise. You practice again and again until it feels like an extension of your will. There is no shouting, no spectacle, just routine. And as the gear settles on your body, not with comfort, but with purpose, you begin to understand. This is not about becoming something new. It is about removing everything else. You are no longer a student. You are a weapon. Later that night, you return to the barracks, but with distance, The younger boys look at you now with a different kind of silence. Not fear, not envy, just recognition. You've passed through something they still face. You remember the sting of hunger, the aching cold, the shame of failure. Now you carry those memories like hidden armor beneath your bronze. And still, you are not free. Even as a hoplite, you remain under the state's eye. You live with other men, not in your own home. Marriage is permitted, but visits are secret. Love is quiet, loyalty louder. Sparta is your spouse now. Yet in rare moments, you might feel it. A flicker of pride, not loud, not boastful, but steady. You lift your shield and know it carries the weight of a city. You step into formation and know the rhythm of 1,000 years. And as you lie down tonight, your limbs tired from drills, the scent of polished bronze still on your fingers, perhaps you'll dream not of battle, but of that quiet moment when you first wore the armor and thought, I belong.
There is no glory in fighting alone. That's one of the first lessons you absorb, not from a scroll, but from the rhythm of your own breath in the line. Side by side, shield to shield, you do not stand out. You cannot, not in the phalanx. The formation is the soul of the Spartan army. A wall of men, no, not men, a single moving entity, one heartbeat, one purpose. Your shield is not just yours, it protects the man to your left. His shield covers you. Every movement, every step is calculated, trained, rehearsed until it no longer feels like decision, only instinct. The instructors told you this long ago. Fear is natural, panic is not. And so when the trumpet sounds, a deep, vibrating note that seems to rise from the earth itself, you march, not because you are brave, but because the formation carries you forward. You are not asked to be a hero, you are asked to hold. Your sandals crunch over dry grass and gravel. The summer heat settles under your bronze like steam. Sweat gathers along your back, but no one speaks. No one turns. You move as one, a wall of red and bronze and resolve. Ahead, the enemy waits. They are loud, singing perhaps, shouting. Their lines are looser, their spears uneven. You've seen it before, the dramatics, the bluster. But the Spartans never shout back. Silence is your banner. And yet, despite everything, despite years of training, of hunger and bruises, of drills before sunrise and lectures about glory, something primitive still stirs inside your chest. A flutter, a warning, because you are human, even here, even now.
But then the first javelin flies overhead, and your shield rises before your mind even commands it. The man beside you steps precisely in time. The line closes tighter. You hear only breathing, the scrape of bronze on wood. And in that moment, the fear changes. It narrows. It focuses. You are no longer a man. You are part of something older, colder, and infinitely more disciplined. The clash comes quickly. The enemy rushes, but you don't meet them as individuals. You don't break formation to chase or to strike. You hold. That's the word they've burned into your memory. Hold the line. Your spear strikes only when needed. Your shield absorbs blows you barely feel. The formation adjusts, flows, not fluidly, but with terrifying precision, like a door that swings shut before a wind can enter. And then it ends. Not with a cheer, not with a charge, but with retreat. The other side breaks, falls back. You advance only as far as commanded. No chasing, no show of dominance. Just discipline. Because in Sparta, victory is not a moment. It's a method. Afterward, you sit in the shade of an olive grove. Your armor smells of sweat and dust and leather. You drink water from a shared gourd. No one boasts. There are no war stories retold. The silence returns, not heavy, but solid. You glance at the men around you. Not friends exactly, not family, but more than both. You don't even know all their names, and it doesn't matter. You know how they move, how they breathe, how they stood beside you when fear knocked and none of you answered. And as you lie down tonight, far from battlefields and barracks, perhaps you'll reflect on the power of unity, the quiet magic of vanishing into something larger than yourself, the strange comfort of losing your edges, not in weakness, but in purpose.
Freedom is a strange word in Sparta. It exists, yes, but not in the way you might imagine. Not in the way the Athenians spoke of it, with debates in the agora and philosophies carved into marble. Here, in the land of spears and silence, freedom is not about choice, it's about clarity. You are free from doubt, free from confusion, free from wandering paths and uncertain dreams. The path of the Spartan is narrow, yes, but it is known. You wake, you train, you obey. You march, you fight, you serve. And in this, many found peace, because there is comfort in order, in knowing where you belong, in not having to ask, "What should I do?" because the answer is always the same. Serve the city. It begins in childhood and carries through every phase of life. Even as a full citizen, a Spartiates, your choices remain few. You live among other men. You eat at common messes. You wear the same cloak, speak the same phrases, perform the same duties. Luxury was forbidden, gold unused. Currency in Sparta was bulky iron, deliberately impractical to discourage hoarding and greed. You were not permitted to dine alone, to decorate your home extravagantly, or even to express too much emotion. Why? Because difference breeds desire, and desire in Sparta was dangerous. If you craved more than what you were given, you might begin to question the system. If you questioned the system, you threatened the unity. And unity, not liberty, was Sparta's true foundation. Even art and music served function, not self-expression. Songs were chants. Dances were drills. Everything beautiful bent toward discipline. And yet, there was dignity in it. To be a Spartan was to walk without hesitation. You didn't have to wonder who you were. You were your city. Your name, your shield, your role, all woven into the red thread of Sparta's purpose. Some called it oppression, others devotion. And perhaps, sometimes, when the moon hung quiet above the Eurotas River, a soldier would look out across the hills and wonder, just briefly, what it might be like to choose a different life. But the thought would pass, because to be Spartan was to believe, and in that belief there was strength. Your meals were simple, yes, but shared. Your home was bare, but not lonely. Your life was hard, but meaningful. You had no wealth to lose, no social ladder to climb, no need to pretend. You were what you appeared to be. And there is a rare kind of freedom in that, the freedom to not perform, not compare, not grasp for more. Still, there were cracks. As Sparta grew,
so did its contradictions. Helots, the enslaved population, vastly outnumbered citizens, and yet their labor sustained the system. You were taught they were lesser, born to serve, but sometimes you caught their eyes in the fields, and they didn't look broken. They looked aware. You were taught not to speak of such things, so you didn't. Obedience, after all, was not just expected, it was identity. To disobey was not merely to rebel, it was to cease being Spartan. And yet, even obedience contains choice. Every morning you woke and tied your sandals. Every night you sharpened your spear. Every time you chose silence instead of resistance. You chose Sparta, over and over again. And as you rest tonight, far from that ancient soil, perhaps you'll reflect on the balance between freedom and order and wonder which weighs more, the right to choose or the peace of knowing you don't have to.
You've been told since childhood that to die well is better than to live poorly. In Sparta, death is not feared, not because it is denied, but because it is defined. There is a right way to die, a proper end, a closing line that honors the life before it. Not all are granted this ending, but for a Spartan, the ideal was clear: to fall in battle, in the phalanx, among brothers, shield raised, formation unbroken, no retreat, no cries for mercy, just silence, steel, and stillness. And when it comes, whether swift or drawn, the death of a Spartan hoplite is not met with screams or grand ceremonies, no wailing crowds, no decorated coffins, no elaborate tombs, only a name, carved into a simple stone. Sometimes not even that. In Sparta, only two kinds of people were permitted a marked grave: a man who died in battle and a woman who died in childbirth, because both were seen as sacrifice for the state. Both gave their bodies to Sparta. This, too, was equality of a particular kind. So when a warrior fell, his family did not mourn in the usual way. There were no black garments, no covered mirrors. Instead, they walked with straighter backs, heads lifted. Pride, not tears, was the language of grief. There's a story told often, passed like a smooth stone from hand to hand. A mother, upon hearing that her son died in war, asked only, "Did he fall forward?" And when told yes, she nodded once. That was all. Because falling forward meant no retreat, no shame, only honor. And yet, death in Sparta wasn't romanticized. It was practical, expected, not sought, but welcomed when it came in the right way. Soldiers prepared themselves quietly. There were no last-minute confessions, no dramatic farewells, only the tightening of straps, the sharpening of blades, the clasp of hands before the march. And if you returned, if you didn't die, the expectation was clear: bring your shield home. Because only cowards dropped their shield in retreat, and cowardice in Sparta was a fate worse than death. You would be shunned, ostracized, denied a seat at meals, denied a name in the songs. Better to be dead than dishonored. Still, memory in Sparta was not loud. There were no towering statues for heroes, no bronze faces glinting in temples. But the names lived in whispers. In training yards, where boys were told to stand like Damaris. In barracks where someone pointed to a scar and said, "This is where Thalen stood." In the eyes of a mother who said nothing, but who held her chin just a little higher when her son's name was spoken by another. Memory was not showy, but it was immovable. And so, even in death, the Spartan did not vanish. He became the standard. The story told at night when boys lay on cold mats. The silence held just a little longer after drills. The reason another boy chose not to flinch, not to flee, not to fail. In that way, Spartan death was not an ending. It was a kind of echo, steady, solid, shaping everything that followed. And as you drift now into the quiet space between waking and sleep, perhaps you'll feel it too. The strange serenity that comes from knowing exactly what your purpose is and how your end will honor your beginning. No confusion, no fear. Just the knowledge that your name will live, not in marble, but in motion.
For centuries, the Spartan shield held firm, unbending, unshaken. Its warriors stood in perfect formation, its laws carved not into stone, but into flesh. The rhythm of Sparta seemed eternal, unchanging, unquestioned. And yet, even stone weathers, even the hardest armor, given time, will crack. It didn't happen all at once. No great explosion, no single defeat. Instead, Sparta began to falter in the quietest of ways, by believing it could not. Its greatness became its weakness. The strict system that had once made it strong, the agoge, the communal life, the code of silence, began to strain under its own weight. Citizens were few. The requirements for Spartan birth were rigid, exclusive. Over time, there simply weren't enough Spartiates to fill the ranks. To preserve the image of strength, they tightened control. Helots, the enslaved population, were worked harder, watched more closely. They outnumbered the Spartans many times over, and whispers of revolt stirred like wind through the fields. Some Spartans feared these whispers, others ignored them. But cracks don't ask permission to grow. Meanwhile, beyond their borders, the world changed. Athens rose, then fell, then rose again. Trade networks bloomed, ideas flowed, philosophy, democracy, strategy. While Sparta kept its walls invisible, others built roads, fleets, alliances. Sparta stood still. The world moved. And when change came knocking, with Macedonian banners and new tactics, with gold instead of iron, with choices instead of orders, Sparta could not answer in time. One by one, battles were lost. First small, then public, then undeniable. The phalanx once feared was outmaneuvered by looser formations and longer spears. Obedience no longer matched innovation, and pride could not hold a line forever. Even within the city, traditions frayed.
Fewer boys entered the agoge. Wealth crept in through cracks in custom. Some sought comfort, status, softness, the very things one scorned. And the shield, it began to slip. A society built on sameness struggled when faced with change, when obedience became habit, not conviction, when silence hid not strength, but confusion. Still they tried. They held tournaments, revived old rituals, tightened laws, But you cannot restore a myth once it has been questioned. You cannot patch identity with nostalgia. Eventually, Sparta faded, not into ruin, but into memory. It did not burn. It echoed. And today, you can still walk its land. The Eurotas still flows. The wind still combs the hills. Ruins remain, not of chalices, but of training grounds, of temples, of barracks. There is no single monument to Sparta's fall, because Sparta never believed it could fall. And maybe, in some way, that's what makes its story so human. Not the strength, but the limits of it. Not the silence, but what was never said. And now, as you lie in the comfort of your present life, with softness around you and choices ahead of you, perhaps you'll feel something for those long-gone warriors. Not envy, not pity, but understanding. They lived for something larger than themselves, and they paid for it too, with glory and with rigidity, with honor and with silence, and in that they became legend. So sleep now with your own kind of freedom, and let the dust of Sparta settle softly into dreams.
Now that our journey through Sparta has ended, you may find yourself lying a little quieter, breathing a little slower, thinking about shields, about silence, about strength that did not roar but simply stood still. Because Sparta is gone, but its echo remains. Not in its armies, they marched into dust. Not in its laws, they were outlived. Not even in its land, soft with ruin, scattered with time and time. No, the echo lives in something more subtle, in discipline, in sacrifice, in the parts of yourself that hold steady when the world grows uncertain. The Spartan didn't ask, "What do I want?" but "What does the world need of me?" A strange question in our age, isn't it? Where we are told that happiness lies in more choice, more comfort, more freedom. But Sparta dared to say, less is enough. They stripped life down to duty, to effort, to endurance. No decoration, no softness, just bone and bronze and belief. And that belief, that certainty, is seductive even now. You see it in locker rooms, in slogans, no pain, no gain. In bookshelves lined with Spartan biographies, in quiet admiration for those who rise early, train hard, suffer silently. We still whisper their name when we speak of strength. And yet we live differently. We let our children cry. We decorate our homes. We marry for love. We ask questions. Because we've learned that while discipline is powerful, it is not everything. We've learned that softness is not weakness, that beauty matters, that choice is a kind of strength too. Still, there's a reason why, late at night, when all is still, we find comfort in their story. It's not the spears, it's not the blood, it's not the training yards or the armor or even the victories.
It's the clarity, the sense of waking up each morning and knowing exactly who you are, where you belong, what you must do. And maybe, in a world filled with noise and options and scrolling and spinning, that sounds peaceful. So perhaps we carry a little Sparta with us, not in law or lifestyle, but in moments, when we push through discomfort, when we show up for others, when we protect, provide, persevere, not for applause, but because it's right. That is Sparta's gift to us. Not to return to their world, but to bring a piece of their steadiness into ours. And now, as your breath deepens and your limbs grow heavy, and the day drifts away like the Eurotas flowing past broken stone, may you sleep not with tension, but with perspective. You are not a Spartan, and you don't have to be, but you have your own shield, your own battles, your own name to carry, not in war, but in peace. And tomorrow, when the sun rises again over a world of soft beds and hot meals, of warmth and laughter and choice, perhaps you'll whisper a quiet thank you to those who came before, to those who endured, to those who remind us that strength comes in many forms, even now, even here. Good night, traveler of time. Rest well.